We need to stop the raves. It's not a safe place for your kids.
In the 90s, what many young people crave is an all-night music and drug-fueled rave.
Everything about it was a middle finger to authority.
Until all these good vibes
raves celebrated hedonism and pleasure.
provoke authorities to harsh the partygoers' buzz.
I think that made politicians uncomfortable. It made parents uncomfortable.
Bulldoze it down.
The government cracks down.
They made ecstasy out to look like it was crack.
The biggest fear is that one of these parties will turn tragic.
Promoters are scared to death for fear of getting raided.
Criminals prey on fun-seeking ravers.
These guys came to kill me. Straight up mafia style.
And the bright, naive promise of the rave movement
People just letting their freak flag fly.
gets twisted into something darker and more sinister.
It was exactly the opposite of peace, love, unity, and respect.
Young adults and teens, many of them underage, find their way into this secret world. Take a look at what makes kids crave the rave.
In the 90s, America's getting turned on to a new kind of midnight to past sunup party.
Sometimes outdoors, sometimes in warehouses, typically illegal.
It's about the lights. It's about the atmosphere.
Raves deliver the opportunity for sex,
It was a pretty hedonistic environment.
mood-enhancing drugs,
Without ecstasy, this would have never happened the way it did. Impossible.
and an innovative musical soundtrack.
The dance music is just a catalyst for all these things.
It becomes an ideal setting for young people seeking an alternative to mainstream conformity.
The early raves were like the Noah's Ark of every kid that didn't really fit in high school.
Everybody thinks that we just do drugs here. It's not for the drugs, really. It's for, togetherness.
I do think that raves felt a bit transgressive.
They were a reaction to what was going on in the broader culture.
So tell me, is this a lifestyle or just a moment in time?
It's a lifestyle and a moment in time.
But this lifestyle's moment in time can be traced back to an innovation in the early 1980s.
Introducing the world's most advanced rhythm machine, the Roland TR-808.
Roland's user-friendly electronic drum machine helps launch a revolution in contemporary music.
So-called house music was first made in the creators' houses, but it was also performed at clubs called the Warehouse and Powerhouse.
Wannabe music producers now have a cheap and easy way to produce electronic music, and it quickly takes over makeshift dance venues in cities like Chicago.
They started playing house music at this Michigan Avenue hotel and health club last summer, and they've been packing them in ever since.
Around the same time, techno music begins in Detroit. I'm Michelangelo Matos. I'm the author of The Underground is Massive, How Electronic Dance Music Conquered America. On the one hand, you've got song-based house music with women singing powerfully over it. And then on the other, there's this sort of synth-heavy, non-vocal, sample-heavy techno music.
But the creation of house and techno is only half of rave's origin story. The other is how a mood-lifting pharmaceutical known as MDMA finds its way into U.S. nightclubs.
If you want to start back at 1914, that's when MDMA was patented. I'm Julie Holland. I'm a psychiatrist, and in the 90s, I was a medical student, and then I was a resident at Mount Sinai Hospital. Also, I was going to raves. Alexander Shulgin is a chemist who, in the 70s, was really interested in various psychedelics. He had been testing on himself, and he felt like MDMA would be really useful for processing trauma.
It turned out to be particularly good for couples therapy. It creates this enormous sense of empathy, like your worst enemies are now your best friends. My name is Frank Owen, and in the 1990s, I became an investigative reporter probing the dark underbelly of club culture. It was like a year's worth of therapy in a pill. And so that leads to an idea that if everybody takes it, then everybody will be on the same wavelength, everybody will love each other.
And who doesn't want to love each other? MDMA's promise to spread good feelings helps drive recreational demand, and production of the drug ramps up to meet it. MDMA also gets a street rebrand. The drug is now referred to as ecstasy.
People were dancing all night and taking this drug. They were buying it with credit cards. They were even being charged like sales tax. And so more and more people were taking this drug, which was not yet illegal.
Good evening.
But in the early 80s, some grown-ups want to stop the fun.
Drugs are menacing our society. They're threatening our values and undercutting our institutions.
And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
Good morning.
The DEA responds with emergency scheduling hearings to determine the legal fate of the popular new party drug.
MDMA, or by the street name ecstasy, under emergency controls in Schedule 1.
The DEA's own administrative law judge thought it should be in Schedule 3. That would mean that research could be done, but people couldn't use it recreationally. And the DEA basically said, you know, thank you for your advice, but we're just going to keep it in Schedule 1.
Schedule 1 means MDMA is now classified, like LSD and heroin, as a drug with high potential for abuse.
The only thing that making it illegal did was stymie clinical research. They didn't really stop any recreational use.
Especially with the crowd in the 80s most attracted to house music.
House music becomes very popular with older, blacker, Hispanic crowds and gay crowds. House music becomes very entrenched in the gay dance scene.
In 1986, at New York's famous Paradise Garage, Frank Owen gets his first taste of combining house music and ecstasy.
It was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. It was the combination of music, drugs, the sense of acceptance, the sense of community. I'm this white limey with long hair, and they were like, as long as you're here to dance, you're welcome, you know? And that was what I fell in love with.
But this precursor for rave culture remains underground in the U.S., in part because of 1980s homophobia fueled by the AIDS crisis.
For the longest time, ecstasy continued to be a gay drug. Straight boys didn't take ecstasy because they thought it would turn you gay. Basically, that was the rumor, right?
But house music-loving Europeans don't share these stereotypes.
That music begins to get popular in Europe in the mid to late 80s. In 1987, a number of British DJs go to the island of Ibiza, and they encounter a DJ named Alfredo, who is playing in an open-air all-night club called Amnesia. And these DJs take MDMA, and they dance all night to this music. The MDMA opens them up and becomes a sort of bonding agent with the music.
When these DJs return home, they start throwing parties, openly advertising the music and ecstasy to attract crowds.
You don't need to take ecstasy to understand the music, but if you did a good pill of MDMA, and in those days, it was medical grade, and then with this music, it just locks you in. All right, what's up? My name's DJ Frankie Bones from Brooklyn, New York City, original rave pioneer of rave culture in America, and here we are, we're gonna discuss a few things. You get locked into the groove and just people would just dance all night long. Almost like it was manufactured in a sense to start this huge thing called rave.
And in Britain suffering from a severe economic downturn, young people gravitate to this new kind of party that can be enjoyed with only a decent pair of dancing shoes and the purchase of some low-cost MDMA.
It becomes pop culture within a year. All of a sudden, everybody wants to dance all night to this crazy, minimalist music while rolling on MDMA.
And it transformed youth culture practically overnight in Britain.
What starts in established nightclubs quickly spreads to almost any place that can power a massive sound system and accommodate a large group of people.
Sometimes outdoors, sometimes in warehouses.
It was very anti-authoritarian. It was happening in illegal spaces. It was mysterious. Even the music was breaking the rules of what music was supposed to sound like.
These renegade parties evolve a new name, raves, and the social movement becomes so widespread that by 1988 and 89, the MDMA-fueled phenomenon is dubbed the second Summer of Love.
And that's the culture that really takes off in Britain. Instead of going out to the pub on a Friday night, you go to a rave.
And they become huge, 20,000 people going to these things.
And it was amazing time. Like, if you look at videos of the UK in '89, people are having the time of their lives, you know?
And soon, DJs and producers in the U.S. making house music are getting calls from their counterparts across the pond.
Me and Tommy Musto, we were a group called Musto with Bones for a little while. And probably around May or June of 1989, we get a phone call from an agency in London asking if Tommy and me want to come over there to DJ these things called raves. And, you know, we want to bring you over to play in August. Would you guys want to come over? So we were like, hell yeah. And it was like the first time two American guys were playing at one of these events, right? And we became really big really fast in the UK. So I basically was going to London once a month for the rest of that year.
But it's his trip in September that is most memorable.
You have 20,000 people in cars trying to get to this aircraft hangar in Ipswich, right? The cops were trying to stop this event from happening. The police had it all blocked off, but over a period of 5 hours, we had to turn the car around on country roads. You'd be like on a one-lane, you know, country road, and then somebody would be out of the cars telling you, you got to turn around and go back this way. It was like a wild goose chase to get to this place.
It's during this rave road trip that Frankie first tries ecstasy.
We're on some country road with dead traffic, nobody's moving. And, you know, this is like in the early days of ecstasy. I heard about ecstasy. I didn't know what it was. I had not tried it yet. Did like my first pill.
And then playing from neighboring cars, Frankie experiences what it's like to hear house music while on MDMA. But not just any house music.
I had my one song coming out of one car and another song coming out of another car. And like, to have this kind of experience where you're in a foreign country, you're somewhere, you know, that you never thought you would be, and your music's coming out of two different cars at the same time. I mean, I kind of melted down in the back of this car.
Frankie finally arrives at the rave near daybreak.
It was one of the most awesome experiences of my life, because when you're in an aircraft hangar with 17,000 people, it was all love, and it was black and white and everything under the sun, and it was all about the music, and wow, it was just amazing.
And he's inspired to bring that experience back to the States.
Nobody in America knew what rave was. And rave became like my calling, really.
And as the 90s begin, he's not alone. Rave will become a hot new product. But the utopian ideals of the movement will prove to have a short shelf life.
I thought that ecstasy and dance music would change the world, you know? But what it ended up as was exactly the opposite of peace, love, unity, and respect.
Here are a few of 1990's pop chart toppers.
As the 90s begin, teens in the U.S. are craving something new.
Pop culture by the late 80s is just turgid. You turn on the radio and it's just like Paula Abdul and power ballads. Alternative rock hadn't really blown up. Hip-hop was only beginning to blow up. And dance music was like the other thing that was really active and interesting at that point.
So when young urban Americans learn their counterparts in the UK are commandeering buildings to throw unauthorized music and drug-powered parties, they're like, sign us up.
In terms of warehouse raves, in terms of breaking into a building, that really starts to happen in '89, and it starts to happen kind of simultaneously on the East and West Coast. LA is, from the beginning, the biggest scene.
LA had two things. Had a bunch of British expats who were traveling back and forward to London, and they had a bunch of warehouses.
And the growing LA scene soon books someone they think is a big-name talent from Britain.
I wound up getting a booking in Los Angeles, June 1st, 1990. When I get off the plane and they hear I have a New York accent, they were like, "Who are you?" They thought they were duped. I'm like, "I'm Frankie Bones." It's like, "Wait a minute, aren't you from the UK?" If they knew I was from Brooklyn, I would have never got the gig.
Frankie soon learns he's made a deal with young devils in the City of Angels.
They taught me how to break into warehouses where you cut the locks off the gate, you put your own lock on the gate on a Saturday or a Sunday, and you come back Thursday or Friday. If your lock's still on the gate, you know you can throw a party there because nobody's going to come check up on you.
But back in New York, to attract a crowd to what he'll call storm rave, he needs a source for ecstasy. So Frankie reaches out to folks he met in England.
I met a few people in the UK that were very interested in bringing ecstasy to New York. I'm not a drug dealer in any size, shape, or form, but I was like, well, if I could meet with your people, I'll put them on with my people. I didn't even know who my people were at that point, but I wound up getting like 2,000 pills to start the scene in New York City.
And he was basically the person who introduced ecstasy to straight kids.
When I got that first delivery of ecstasy, like, we started giving pills to people, the word just spread really quickly. It just kept doubling in size until we did 5,000 people. These parties would go to noon the next day, whereas the club traditionally closed at 4 a.m., we're out there watching the sunrise, you know, looking at the city across the water and just playing this music. Anybody that came to one of these parties knew something special was going on in 1990 and 91.
In December of 1991, Details publishes a major feature by Legs McNeil about the making of a party in LA at a water park. And all over the U.S., people read this, and that's their blueprint.
By 1993, there was a rave in every city across America, you know, and so the whole country by 93 was raving.
Especially underage teens who have no other place to party.
Rave becomes a thing for kids who can't get into clubs. It's not for adults. It's a DIY kid thing.
So I started going to raves in LA when I was 13. I'm Vivian Host. I also go by DJ Star Eyes. I'm a DJ, producer, party promoter, music journalist, podcast host, and in the 90s, I was raving my balls off. Of course, you're gonna use that one. I'm gonna hate it. Back in the early 90s, it was a lot more complicated to go to a rave than it is now. I used to go to this coffee house with my friend who was also 13, and there was a guy that worked there that was 19, and he took us to a rave in an unmarked white van. It's like every parent's nightmare. I think I was kind of freaked out because everybody was older than me. I was definitely being offered nitrous balloons and all kinds of drugs. And I think it was a lot darker than what I was expecting. But I kind of wanted more, so I kept going.
Because for young ravers like Vivian, these parties provide more than just house music and ecstasy. They're a place to feel accepted.
I never felt like I fit in with any of the mainstream dominant culture. I didn't have the right guest genes. All of these things. I wasn't a popular kid. I didn't play sports. I didn't give a shit about any of that stuff, you know? And rave was a place where I could, you know, be myself. I think acceptance of people just letting their freak flag fly and people that are different than you is like a real core tenet of rave culture.
There was an ethos about how you were going to behave at a rave. You know, there was going to be a certain amount of empathy and respect for each other.
And that comes from the drug that's most associated with rave, which is ecstasy.
As the scene grows, these rave ideals evolve into a formal declaration.
A little bit later on, you started to get the rave values codified into this term called PLUR.
P-L-U-R.
Peace.
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 Love.
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 Unity.
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 Respect.
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 It's just this idea that the rave community is one community. You know, those are the rules. That's the ethos.
And that was the sort of guiding light for a lot of the early 90s parties. It still kind of is the idea.
But not every raver practices what they preach.
This idea of plur, that everyone was so nice at the rave, like, it wasn't really like that. There was beautiful times on ecstasy, but yeah, like, there was a lot of creepery in the early 90s, a lot of people taking advantage of other people, a lot of promoters not paying people.
In New York City, it's a new generation of the long-established underworld that'll target the rave scene.
The irony of the rave scene in New York was that it took root among, like, these Italian-American street toughs.
Rave's reliance on the drug ecstasy draws sharks.
So we start to see the infiltration of the criminal element into the rave scene or into the ecstasy scene pretty early on, because they understood that we can make a lot of money out of it.
Especially a club promoter known as Lord Michael Caruso.
Michael Caruso, you know, he was our buddy, my close friend in the beginning. What happened was, Lord Michael wanted control of the ecstasy thing in New York. He wanted to be that guy. And we put him up with our people. They would come into New York City with pills. They had to bring 10,000 at a time. I didn't want to be, like, having my people even hanging with that many. So we let Lord Michael in on our side.
Lord Michael begins promoting a techno club night in Manhattan he calls Future Shock.
This Future Shock thing, it got really big really quick.
Future Shock draws a crowd that's attracted by the drugs, but is less interested in upholding plur.
It was more like a soccer riot than a rave, you know?
You have all these Italian, you know, the weightlifter guys, you know, steroids and like, all aggressive.
All hugging each other and saying, I love you, man. I love you, man.
Future Shock also introduces Lord Michael to some guys who share his ambitions.
These gangsters start turning up. He forms an alliance with them, and they start robbing all the ecstasy dealers. So they basically take over the ecstasy trade with violence, gangsterism, kidnappings, home invasions. I mean, they literally terrorize the out of people. Yeah, at the same time, they put on great shows. He knew how to throw a great rave, but he was also at the same time, you know, basically the Al Capone of raves, you know?
He basically wanted to be king of New York.
And the wannabe king sees Frankie Bones as a threat.
I came home from a storm rave one night. 4 guys, each one took a swing at my head. These guys came to kill me.
In May of 1992, the free week-long Castle Morton Common Festival and Rave draws up to 40,000 partygoers in the UK.
And that was really like a wake-up call, I guess, for the British government and the British police.
You know, when your kids are going out every weekend to these raves and doing drugs, it alarmed the government.
The government responds by passing the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act, effectively outlawing raves across the country.
If there was more than 20 people dancing in a location, the police could come shut it down. It was insane, and you had actually like pretty big protests in the streets against the criminal justice bill.
And all it did was basically push the culture into the nightclubs.
And the scene explodes on a more mainstream level. In 1992 in the States, raves are still super underground.
And in Lord Michael Caruso's corner of the underground, this wannabe ecstasy kingpin is running the gangster playbook.
If somebody did put on a rave that coincided with one of his nights, he would send his goons to beat the promoters up. There's that famous story about Frankie Bones, right?
I came home from a storm rave one night, had groceries in my hand in a brown bag, and 4 dudes come up right in front of my house. And I see a guy with a gun, and I see a guy with a baseball bat, and I get whacked. It was straight up mafia style. 4 guys, each one took a swing at my head. A bat, a pistol whip, and a pistol whip, and they were gone. My ear was hanging off backwards. It was a mess. When the police did the report, they were like, they only hit you in the head and then they left. They wanted to kill you. And I'm just like, wow, this is like, I'm trying to promote a peaceful thing and this is what happens.
But Frankie won't quit.
We had a party that weekend. I had 4 holes in my head, like 290 stitches I had. And I'm still DJing that weekend. I still have scars on my head from it, so.
Worse, he still wrestles with the belief that he was betrayed by someone he once called a friend.
These guys came to kill me, and they were contracted from Lord Michael, who to this day would tell me, no, that's not how it went down, Bones.
When Lord Michael's tough guy empire collapses in the late 90s, most people forget all about him, but not Frankie.
And, you know, I don't talk to him, but, like, you know, I think I got on the phone with him once and I said, you know, the only reason I'm speaking to you right now is because I know what you did and you try to have me killed and I'm still here talking to you, so I'm cool.
Prince George's County Police are trying to put an end to a dangerous craze before someone gets hurt.
By 1992 and 93, local authorities are finally waking up to some of the dangers posed by large clandestine raves.
The biggest fear is that one of these parties will turn tragic, not unlike the Happy Land Social Club fire in New York, in which 87 people jammed into a small dance hall were killed in a raging inferno.
It introduces us to this very secret world.
The rising popularity of raves prompts local news stories, which prompts local authorities to take an interest.
And for the first time, Prince George's County shut down a so-called rave party.
But authorities don't really know what's going on at these events.
He's found drugs at raves.
That ignorance becomes clear when police in Wisconsin finally decide to act.
At the floor, you'll find
there's a party that takes place in Milwaukee that happens on Halloween. It's called Grave. About 1,000 kids go. And by all accounts, there's lots of MDMA on the premises. Drugs galore. The Milwaukee police decide to bust them for underage drinking. Guns out, everybody on the floor. They zip cuffed 900 kids.
The offense? Aiding and abetting the consumption of alcohol in an unlicensed public setting.
And they arrested 900 kids for drinking, which none of them were doing. And they all beat the rap. What the MPD didn't do was find any of the enormous number of drugs on the premises because police just had no idea what they were doing. They didn't know what MDMA was. When the promoters went back to clean up the warehouse, they found $10,000 worth of drugs stuffed into the cracks of the walls.
The authorities' obsession with stopping the consumption of alcohol blinds them to a public health problem in early raves that they could help solve with some simple education.
The people who are going to take ecstasy and go to raves and dance all night, they don't want alcohol for the most part. So they're really only drinking water. And the bars would sell water because how else were they going to make their money? And not everybody had the money for water. So they'd be dancing for hours and hours and getting overheated and not drinking any water. And they would often need medical attention because they were having heat stroke.
Plus, ecstasy Schedule I status makes scientific research into its harmful effects all but impossible.
If you don't know what's happening, you can't give any good advice. You know, you can't give harm reduction information if you don't know what the harms are.
Instead, unfounded speculation about the dangers of ecstasy dominates mainstream discussions about the drug.
Do you plan on having children? And if so, do you think they're going to come out normal? Okay, this is the thing.
I was on a show called Jane Pratt on Lifetime Television in 1993 with some other ravers and DJs and producers. I was out of medical school. I was a full-fledged MD.
Does not drain your spinal fluid. It does not cause Parkinson's.
To the best of our knowledge,
it does not cause mutated babies.
Wait a minute.
As an experienced raver, Dr. Holland becomes an outspoken advocate for improved harm reduction and drug education about MDMA.
What do you think it's therapeutic? You name it. Possibilities. I think a lot of reasons. Pain control, hypnosis, creative visualization, couple therapy.
That was pretty early for MDMA. I mean, a lot of people had never heard of raves. They hadn't heard of ecstasy.
Depression, we don't know. We haven't tried. I'd like to see.
And the lack of more detailed ecstasy research is literally killing people.
It was a mess. It was really a mess. And people were dying because Turns out it's not just that overheating is a problem with MDMA, with ecstasy. It was also that overhydrating was a problem.
When teens start dying at raves, taking too much ecstasy is often blamed, when the real cause of death is taking too much water.
MDMA causes some water retention. Like, if you haven't taken MDMA, you can drink a gallon of water and pee a gallon of water, basically. If you have taken MDMA, you won't be peeing out a gallon of water, and you will essentially sort of drown your brain or your lungs where you've got too much fluid, not enough salt, and that creates a situation where you get seizures and you can die.
But in the early 90s, the drug is always the problem.
We're losing the war on drugs. More people are consuming drugs, more violent crime associated with it, more drugs coming across our border.
Ravers are left to find their own DIY solutions.
We all kind of had to figure this out for ourselves. And eventually the message got out, keep cool, take breaks, don't overheat, but also don't overhydrate. Just drink fluids to replace what you're losing from sweating. I mean, it really had to come from the streets.
But as the 90s go on, what's coming from the streets will threaten the entire rave scene.
What happened in 94 to 95 was all the good MDMA started being cut with like bad drugs.
And it's hard to pursue peace, love, unity, and respect while you're dying from an unintended drug overdose.
I was walking up this very dark staircase, and then on either side, there's just like 7 or 8 ketamine dealers. And I was just like, wow, are there more drug dealers and like people in this party? Like, what's going on?
Tens of thousands of people are camped out in upstate New York tonight for 3 days of music. If the scene sounds familiar, so does the name, Woodstock.
The return of Woodstock in 1994 brings a side stage devoted to electronic music called Ravestock.
I played this party, and it's like an amazing event to be a part of. This is where they were introducing rave to the masses, pretty much.
And it works.
When we were doing Storm Rave, the biggest party I did was 5,000 people in 1992. Then by like 94, 95, there was 10,000 people parties.
Music industry executives suddenly see rave music as their next big thing.
Alt-rock is losing steam. Kurt Cobain has killed himself. Pearl Jam is shunning the spotlight. Soundgarden is about to break up. The music business is ready to push what they are now calling electronica.
Electronic music producers quickly become industry superstars, in part because their music has other profitable commercial applications.
It's the perfect music to sell crap to, right? Because essentially it's soundtrack music, you know what I mean? So fashion shows, advertising, Hollywood movies, that's the way it becomes mainstream.
But nothing kills a cool underground scene like being accused of selling out, and God forbid, becoming popular.
But when the San Diego Convention Center hosts the underground party scene, rave is mainstream.
The capitalism part of it was always there, but bit by bit, it starts to become more about the money and the big business.
You happen to hippie, you happen to punk. I mean, it's like, it gets co-opted, right? It's not that it's a good or bad thing, it's just the natural process of how an underground culture becomes part of the mainstream.
Even the drug dealers, you know what I mean? They start off like just selling drugs to their friends or whatever, and then they don't care what kind of drugs they're selling because they're just trying to like make a quick buck.
And the fastest way to make more money is to charge the same for a lower quality product.
As more people heard about ecstasy and raves, more people were interested in trying the drug. And unfortunately, what happens when demand outstrips supply is that you start getting counterfeit products. And the more popular the drug became, the more you just didn't know what you were buying.
Starting in the mid-90s, pills being sold as ecstasy could no longer be trusted to contain much, if any, MDMA.
Other things infiltrate. A lot of MDMA got cut with speed. And that's kind of a real party killer, too. Like, people are just speeding out of their skulls, and it becomes much more aggro and macho and not as loving and not as fun. A lot more sneering, a lot less hugs.
The lack of reliable ecstasy also leads many ravers to experiment with other ways of getting high.
Drugs are baked into this thing. And what happens over time is that it stops just being about, MDMA as a bonding agent and just starts to be kind of a free-for-all.
So you start seeing people, doing ecstasy, but also combining it with cocaine, or crystal meth, or GHB, or Special K, or even heroin. People start experimenting with all sorts of chemicals, and it creates these very unpredictable cross reactions, which completely changes the mood of the scene.
One of the darkest parts of rave was how many people have OD'd or died or had really bad drug experiences.
I ain't a problem with stepping over the bodies of 16-year-olds freaking high on K. You know what I mean? People were dying. That's not good. It wasn't good.
I can't lie, it's a huge part of the culture and something that we've all experienced for ourselves or seen other people go through,
By the late 90s, bad drugs and bad behavior are causing the rave scene to buckle under its own weight.
15 people were hospitalized after overdosing on the drug G, and G poses an additional risk for young women. Men slip them this lethal elixir as the newest date rape drug.
There's only so many years of this that you can endure. By around 99, 2000, that's when it was just I don't know, way more parties sucked and were sketchy than were good.
To see this world for ourselves, 2020 attended some raves with a hidden camera.
Media concern about the dangers of drug use at raves gains momentum.
We didn't even get near the door before we were approached to buy drugs.
You want some X? Acid? Special K?
Then comes the disastrous return of Woodstock in 1999. Though Woodstock is a mainstream rock concert, rave music is now embedded into the event. But unlike the peaceful version 5 years earlier, this 30th anniversary festival descends into chaos. It's plagued by inadequate facilities, a lack of security leads to riots, multiple reported sexual assaults, and 4 deaths. For those already eyeing raves with suspicion, its association with the Woodstock disaster confirms their worst fears.
We're fortunate this morning to have with us one of our allies in the law enforcement aspect of the club drugs.
Raves and so-called club drugs draw the attention of the DEA.
Law enforcement are convinced that the only reason people go to raves is for drugs, and that the only reason people put on raves is to sell drugs.
Ecstasy is dangerous, and dangerous people are trying to convince our children to use it.
Ecstasy, the peace and love drug that helped launch the rave movement, is specifically singled out, despite possibly being the least dangerous drug being consumed at the events.
More than 50 people could face criminal charges today after a weekend rave.
Starting in 2000, federal authorities cracked down hard on the already declining rave scene.
Someone sends out a memo to all the police and is America's youth is being destroyed. We have to crack down on these things. This becomes a focus of the whole U.S. police force.
Raves also draw the attention of a future president determined to turn on the lights, end the party, and send the kids home.
Arrest the promoter. Find a rationale unrelated to drugs.
The Rave Act was kind of like the final nail in the coffin of a scene that was already dying, basically.
The media has played a role in glamorizing this very dangerous drug.
In 2001, the U.S. Senate convenes a 10 years late hearing into what they see as the scourge of ecstasy and raves.
If I were governor of my state or mayor of my town, I would be passing new ordinances relating to stiff criminal penalties for anyone who held a rave.
Joe Biden decided that he was the anti-rave crusader and trotted out this law from the 1980s.
I'm the guy who authored the crack house legislation.
The crack house law was, if you own the property on which the drugs are being sold or manufactured, you are responsible for the criminal activity that goes on in your building.
Bulldoze down their business. bulldoze it down. Literally.
To extend the crack house laws to include temporary events like raves, Biden co-sponsors a bill called the RAVE Act.
RAVE stood for Reducing Americans' Vulnerability to Ecstasy. It underlines the idea that if you are in any way connected with this culture, you are risking arrest. And it worked. Nobody ever took it again.
Thanks, Joe Biden.
Biden does finally get a bill passed.
By that point, it's almost irrelevant anyway because all the American rave promoters are scared to death of putting on a party for fear of getting raided.
For some, this intense resistance to raves by those in authority comes as no surprise.
We're a puritanical country. We have a lot of maybe shame or guilt around pleasure or hedonism. You know, you're supposed to work. But the raves really celebrated hedonism and pleasure. That made politicians uncomfortable. It made parents uncomfortable.
But as the 2000s continue, discomfort towards raves starts to soften.
And it wasn't until like the EDM music came out, 2006, 2007, where things started picking up again.
Rave music comes back into fashion, now rebranded as EDM, electronic dance music.
Suddenly, electronic music is huge. All these festivals spring up. They just change the terms, and suddenly it's not a rave anymore, so nobody tries to bust it. And it becomes big business, much bigger business than it ever was in the 90s.
As for the drug that helped first launch rave culture, after 36 years as a Schedule I drug, improved scientific knowledge allows MDMA to return to its therapeutic roots. In 2021, the FDA approves a trial to assess MDMA's promising potential in treating PTSD.
But it's only when it's combined with therapy. It's the therapy that is the primary active treatment, and the MDMA, the medicine, makes the therapy more effective. So
when they go through the protocol, as many as 2/3 or more of people are getting rid of their symptoms and don't need to take medication for post-traumatic stress disorder anymore. So this is very, very rare in psychiatry. People don't usually get cured.
The impressive trial results are submitted to the FDA for final drug approval in December 2023.
We finally have the data that FDA requires to approve MDMA is safe and effective when it's used in the context of psychotherapy. And that's really exciting.
And 35 years after the first UK raves, the global movement shows no signs of stopping.
It's so funny to see how many of the older music journalists I know who are still just like, when is this going to go away? It's never going to go away.
I would argue that you still sort of can feel the messages of peace, love, unity, respect at things like Coachella and Burning Man and Bonnaroo, but I just don't think of them as raves anymore.
It's actually my definition of purgatory. Being stuck in the mud for 3 days with a bunch of frat boys and sorority sisters high on bad ecstasy. I can't actually think of a worse experience. So it really would drive me to murder if I had to do that.
Critics aside, the desire for raves is stronger than ever.
Post-pandemic, the raves are crazy.
This thing is still growing. I still think more people are getting involved in it to this very day.
And the scene now is much more racially diverse, more queer, more different styles of music.
On a pop level, electronic music is bigger than it's ever been. We got to keep doing this. And, you know, it's like the world's not going to stop, but a lot of strife out there. Let's just dance.